Have you ever looked at someone you know, a friend, a family member, maybe even a public figure, and you know they're smart, they're strong, they're so capable, but you just can't understand it? Why do they stay? Why do they stay in a relationship that is so clearly, so painfully destructive? It's one of the most gut-wrenching questions we can ask. But you know what? The answer isn't about weakness, and it's not a lack of willpower. It's about biology. It's about what's happening deep inside the brain.
Just imagine this. You're watching someone you love, absolutely broken and crying, finally, packing a suitcase to leave their abusive partner. And just as their hand is on the doorknob, that partner falls to their knees, begging, pleading, promising the world will change, and then you see it. Something just shifts. The tension drains from their body, they drop the suitcase, and they walk right back into that same hell. Now, from the outside, it looks like a choice. But what's really happening in that moment? It's not a failure of will. It's a biological hijacking.
To really get this, let's talk about someone we'll call Sarah. Sarah is a 34-year-old surgeon. Now, in the operating room, she is the absolute definition of control. She's rational, she's precise, she literally saves lives every day. But at home? At home, she's a prisoner. And to understand why, we have to look at her past, because it unknowingly paved the way for all of this. See, growing up, her parents' love was inconsistent, unpredictable. So she learned really early on that love was something you had to fight for, something you had to earn, that it was never a guarantee. And now she's with a partner who will humiliate her for days on end and then suddenly show up with some grand gesture, like a huge bouquet of flowers. And in that one moment, all the logic, all the training of a surgeon, it just evaporates, and she forgives him, even as her body is screaming, stuck in this constant, exhausting state of high alert. Now, Sarah's story isn't just about her feelings or her history. It's about chemistry. The cycle she is trapped in isn't just emotional. It's creating a powerful chemical addiction right inside her brain. And if we want to understand why it is so incredibly hard to break free, we have to look at the science. So what's actually going on here? A trauma bond isn't just a strong feeling of being attached to someone. No, it's a full-blown biological addiction to a toxic person. It's fueled by this volatile cocktail of our own brain chemicals, turning our own survival instincts completely against us. Okay, so first up, you've got cortisol. During all those times of abuse, the silent treatment, the insults, the fits of rage, the brain is just flooded with this stress hormone. This puts the body into a constant state of hyperarousal. You're literally living in fight or flight, walking on eggshells, just physically and mentally drained by this chronic, gnawing anxiety. But then, the abuser switches to the love-bombing phase. The apologies, the intense affection, and the brain gets this massive hit of dopamine. This is the same chemical that's all about reward and motivation. But here's the kicker. When that affection is taken away again, the dopamine levels plummet, creating an intense, physical craving to get that euphoric feeling back, no matter what it costs.
And to top it all off, there's oxytocin. We call it the bonding hormone. During those makeup phases, the release of oxytocin creates this deep, profound sense of trust and safety. It literally acts like a biological glue, bonding you more deeply to the very person who is the source of all your pain. It just overrides the logical part of your brain that's screaming, "Danger!"
So when you put it all together, you can really see how this vicious cycle completely rewires the brain. The constant swings between cortisol-fueled terror and dopamine-fueled euphoria make the abuser the only person who can provide relief from the pain they themselves are causing. They become both the poison and the antidote.
And let's be perfectly clear about this. This is not an exaggeration. Research shows that this dopamine dependency is neurochemically similar to a severe substance addiction. We're talking about cocaine-level addiction. This is precisely why that question, "Why don't you just leave?" is so completely misguided. You can't just tell an addict to stop. It's a physiological battle. So, if the chemicals are the fuel, what's the engine that's driving this addiction? Well, it's a psychological principle so powerful, it's used to design the most addictive machines on Earth. It's called intermittent reinforcement. I want you to think of a slot machine, right? If it paid out every single time you pulled the lever, you'd get bored. If it never paid out, you'd just walk away. But because the payout is unpredictable, it might happen on the very next pull. You stay hooked. You just keep compulsively pulling that lever. That unpredictability, that's the most powerful tool there is for creating addiction. In a toxic relationship, the abuser is the slot machine. Those unpredictable moments of kindness, that's the jackpot. And this keeps the victim's brain in a constant state of hope and anticipation, always chasing that next win, believing that if they just try a little harder, the good version of their partner will finally stay for good.
So beyond the biological addiction, the brain also builds this whole series of cognitive traps to justify staying. These are like the psychological locks on the door, making escape feel not just difficult, but completely impossible.
One of the biggest traps is something called cognitive dissonance. It's the intense mental stress you feel when you hold two contradictory beliefs at the same time. On the one hand, you believe, my partner loves me, but on the other hand, your reality is, my partner consistently hurts me. The brain simply cannot hold on to that conflict. It has to resolve it somehow.
And since leaving feels impossible because of that trauma bond, the brain often resolves the conflict by changing its perception of reality. It starts to justify the abuse, or, and this is so common, it internalizes it through self-blame. This isn't a failure, it's a coping mechanism. Blaming yourself gives you this false sense of control in a situation that feels utterly uncontrollable.
Then you've got the sunk cost fallacy. This is that belief that because you've already invested so much, years of your life, all your emotional energy, all your sacrifices, leaving now would mean that all of that investment was just wasted. So you double down, throwing good energy after bad, desperately hoping to somehow justify the suffering you've already been through. And this isn't just all in your head. The chronic stress of this environment physically changes your brain. Research shows the prefrontal cortex, that's your center for rational thought and planning, it actually shrinks. At the same time, the amygdala, your brain's fear and threat detection center, it gets bigger and it becomes hyperactive. You are literally being rewired to have less access to logic and a hair-trigger fear response.
Okay, so now that we understand the trap, let's talk about the way out. And if any of this has felt familiar to you, this next part is especially for you. It really starts with a radical reframing of what's been happening. I need you to hear this. Your inability to leave is not a character flaw. It is not stupidity or a lack of strength. It is the absolute genius of your nervous system doing its #1 job, trying to keep you alive in a situation it sees as a constant threat. Your loyalty wasn't a weakness, it was a survival strategy. And that deep, heavy shame you might be feeling, that shame is not yours to carry. It belongs to the person who exploited you. It belongs to a society that asks, why didn't you leave, instead of, why did they abuse you? You are not to blame for how your brain and your body adapted to survive an absolutely impossible situation.
And there is a path back to yourself. It's a scientific one. Research shows it takes approximately 11 weeks of no contact, for the brain to detoxify from the chemical dependency of a trauma bond, for your dopamine receptors to start healing. It's a neurobiological detox, and it is possible.
So, what does this all mean? It means the bravest thing you can possibly do, in a world that just might not get it, is to finally admit to yourself that love should not feel like survival. You deserve safety. You deserve peace. It's time to stop pulling the lever, walk away from the machine, and reclaim your life. Because you are worth infinitely more than a jackpot that was never real to begin with.